Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This virtual program is made possible through the generous support of donors like you. Because the South Dakota Art Museum receives operational funding from South Dakota State University and the South Dakota Arts Council, your donations, memberships, and gifts fund fantastic exhibitions and programs like this. Thank you. Today, we are celebrating the new exhibition, Moments of Is, Stuart Artist-In-Residence Alums. The Stuart Artist-In-Residence program invites one artist from outside the South Dakota region to the SDSU campus every fall to work from the Ritz Gallery space, engage with faculty and students, and to create a final exhibition. Signe and Joseph Stewart funded the program through a generous donation, and it has been a transformative opportunity within the School of Design since 2015. Signe is an artist based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, who was a professor of art at SDSU. Through March 30th, the museum is exhibiting a 6-decade retrospective of her important career. Her husband, Joseph, was director of this museum for over 2 decades and had a tremendous impact on the visual arts in the state. Moments of Is gathers artworks from 8 of the Stuart Artist-In-Residence alums and will be on display through May 12th. The title of the exhibition is taken from the name of one of Signe Stewart's paintings. The phrase grounds the artists and us in the past, present, and future. Finally, I want to thank Diana Beal, SDSU Associate Professor in the School of Design, for her assistance in planning the exhibition. Our education curator, Abigail Ramsbottom, will next introduce today's program and the participating artists.
Thanks, Taylor. So today we'll be hearing from 4 exhibiting artists, and each will talk for about 10 to 12 minutes, sharing images of their works on display and speaking to their practices. With us today are Duy Hoàng, Haval, Paige Mostowy, and Neal. At the end, they'll be available for a Q&A. And so please feel free to put your questions into the chat as we go through each artist's talk, and we'll return to those at the end. So first, we'll be hearing from Duy Hoàng. Duy currently resides in New York City and was the 2021 Stuart Artist-In-Residence. I'll leave it to you, Duy.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to chat with you all and sort of be back in the space of South Dakota again. And yeah, I'm grateful to be here. And to speak a little bit, cover a bit of ground so we can be on the same page of how this work kind of come about. My work, my practice and research while I was in residence and doing projects there evolve around the idea of home and more so temporary home in contrast to the idea of what home really is, and and how do we think of the idea of permanence versus temporary. And so while I was in residence, the installations that came about there became laboratories of sort that I was spending time collecting plant materials and insects and discarded materials that I could find around the environment, and sort of bring that back into the studio and dissecting what I was looking at, researching what I was looking at, and all of this practice kind of come from my migration history, moving to the U.S. at a young age, and sort of confronted with a new environment. And the only way for me to sort of understand what I was, where I am at, and the world that I'm surrounded in, I had to dissect that environment, the shifts and changes within everyday life, the landscape, the language, the culture, and sort of build it back up into a nesting habitat of sort that I could call home, a new home for me to exist in, and trying to question my way through the world. And from there, my work continues to think about these topics and themes, and so this work came right after that. And what we're looking at is a wall relief using muslin and yarn and wood dowels, and sort of erect a survival shelter onto the wall. So it becomes a wall relief in the shape of a tent, and in this case, the shelter is called a dining fly. That's the style or the shape that the configuration that this temporary shelter is called. And so kind of flip it onto the wall, and it becomes a wall relief. So we can go to the next slide, if you don't mind. Yeah, and continue on. And this one is called a sea fly wedge, and so it's just a different configuration of the shelter. And so thinking about the impermanence home, and thinking about outdoor cultures and camping and through hikes and all of these activities, through those, I was trying to think about what is home, and is it a physical place? Is it a mental space? Is it something that I can just put on my back and go? Is it the people? Is it the memory? Is it so what is it? So these kind of work continue on that thread. And the next one. And so this is a new project that just finished for the space specifically. And this one is called Ouroboros Contrail. So what we're looking at is a series of photographs that I've been taking throughout the years. And I believe this is for the past 10 years that I've been collecting photos just from taking photos of the sky whenever there's a contrail lines that are go through the sky. And the contrails are the steam vapor that left behind the trail of the aircraft in the sky. And so I've been thinking about this, been collecting these images, and here they come together in aligned into a horizontal lines. Like all the contrails line up into a perfect horizontal lines on the surface of a wall, and wrap around this movable wall, kind of become a continuous loop. So continuing that thinking of different spaces and where I am, my perspective at that moment, and the different sky can link and thread together like a piece of textile, like a book unfolding, or all the different spaces become one and overlapping at all time. And thinking about where these where the moment is, and kind of think about the idea of the exhibition, the moments of is, and that cyclical nature of of being, sort of result in this project. And I think I'll leave you with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dee. And again, feel free to put questions in the chat that you may have. Next, we'll have Haval speak. Ali was the 2022 Stuart Artist-In-Resident, and she currently resides in Iowa City, Iowa.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. So I live in Iowa City, Iowa. My name is Haval. I'm currently a lecturer in painting and drawing at the University of Iowa. I wanted to start off and just give some material context to the work so people know what exactly it is that they're looking at. So most of my pieces begin with a ceramic base. So the shoes that are exhibited here, that bright cobalt blue part is actually ceramic, and those are fired at cone 1, which is a little over 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, and that allows them to become pretty sturdy. So at that temperature, the silica fuses really well with the other materials in the clay body and makes it really strong. I don't glaze anything, so it's really important that I've got this strong surface to begin with. And then somehow with these ceramic surfaces, what I do is cover them somehow. So sometimes they're covered in fabric that I'm wrapping around, like the chains in this image. Other times they're covered in rhinestones after being painted. And with the rhinestones, I dot them on with little individual pieces of glue and then dot on the rhinestone. So it's a really painstaking process, but it's also very meditative for me because I love watching it slowly get encrusted with these gems. Other materials that I use are pom-poms and fringe and feather boas, gloves, nail polish, lots of beauty supplies materials proliferate in my work. I don't always have an idea of what things are going to look like before starting. Sometimes I'm just making parts and pieces and putting them together later on. And it feels a lot like getting ready in the morning and putting an outfit together. I've got pieces that are larger, some that are a little bit smaller. So this one here is something like 21 inches tall, but I have others that are 5 feet by 5 feet on a much larger scale where there's a lot of parts and pieces that comes together. So that's some context of what they are made of and sort of the size of them. In terms of like my art making, I feel like I've always been making art for as long as I can remember, but the starting point really feels like when I began making performative work in undergrad, which might feel like the opposite of the work I'm making now and showing, but I'll explain that connection. So in undergrad, I made these really elaborate garments and was doing these performances myself or with classmates that I convinced to help me out. And after doing a few of these, I realized I wasn't into being the performer. I loved making the garments and I loved seeing the effect of the public watching these performances, but I couldn't get into the right mental space for being the performer. It's something I want to revisit in the future with people who are meant to perform, but regardless, making that work made me get into the idea of making work that at least feels very performative. And so I took that to mind when making these static sculptures. So from afar, the pieces I make are very eye-catching. When the light shines on them, they're very, very sparkly and scintillating, something that's hard to get from a photograph, unfortunately, but under those really bright, hot lights, you're sort of drawn into them from far. So on top of using the rhinestones and I also use like pom-poms and shimmery fabrics and fringe, all these things that are really eye-catching and make you come in. And those materials really infuse this performative aspect into these static sculptural pieces that I make. A lot of the materials I use are also really frilly since they are beauty supplies materials, and the color scheme could be described as a very Barbie pink, which is exactly what my studio is right now. Lavenders, teals, really bright candy colors are saturating the work that I'm making. I didn't used to do this 2 or 3 years ago to the degree I do now, and allowing myself to use whatever color I want has been really freeing for me. So the conventional perception of pink is that it's merely pretty and superficial and lacking substance. However, I've been using that idea against itself to subvert such stereotypes. So back in 22, I was in an exhibition that inspired me to think more about this concept. The exhibition was titled The Ecstasy of St. Brittany, and the artists in the show were all using really excessive decor with powerful underlying concepts related to femininity. So instead of seeing decoration and adornment as something bad or superficial, it was seen as something powerful and a force to be reckoned with. So think back to the feeling somebody must have gotten while they were walking through the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles for the first time. The work I make is meant to resemble oversized pieces of jewelry. So in the show, you see like a pair of shoes. There's another thing that looks like a brooch, this one right here. And sometimes they're not necessarily like a real piece of jewelry. They just might feel jewelry adjacent somehow. And these oversized jewelry pieces serve as self-portraits and capture both my personal experiences as a woman and those that other people have shared with me. And so this gives the work a feeling of more significance and weight. These pieces feel like surrogates for the body. And so the hope is that when people are looking at these objects, they can imagine themselves wearing it. And as they're thinking about wearing them, there is this challenge of navigating the weight, which adds another layer of complexity and invites some deeper engagement with those pieces. So they aren't just things on the wall or the floor anymore. They're something that people can actually imagine themselves in. What happens when they're wearing this massive chain around their neck? What happens if they're trying to like put their feet in these shoes? So the pair of shoes right here, these chains are sort of linking them together, which if you were imagining to put yourself in them and walking, it would be very difficult, not only because the surface of the shoes are really painful with the rhinestones, but also because there's this short chain between them that makes that movement more restricted. When I was at South Dakota, I was making a lot of different pairs of high heels. I was thinking about like the gendered history of high heels, and it's a very long, drawn out thing, but essentially high heels were initially made for men, and it was for Persian soldiers so that they could steady themselves on horses, and who was wearing high heels sort of changed throughout history. And now we're getting to a point where both genders can wear that. And so I was really interested in like how an object could change based on the gender of who is actually wearing it. And a lot of these pairs of high heels that I've been making have chains dragging behind them. One pair that I've made before has chains that are littered with a lot of locks and not enough keys. So the viewer can imagine that if they're wearing these heels with chains behind them, it's going to be really difficult to walk around. And this is also something symbolic of how we're navigating society right now, with the over a year-long decision ago of Roe v. Wade, which is still something that's in the news so much today and a huge issue that continues to weigh on everyone, among other issues like the recent issue in Alabama with IVF. So more and more, we're just seeing these sort of conversations appearing in the news. And a lot of the work too comments on things beyond a political realm. It comments on these little things like being hyper aware of your body and your appearance, overthinking about what it is that you're going to look at on your body, and the little things which are symbolic to us and influence our lives. So I actually grew up in Alabama, and the transition from Alabama to Iowa influenced my work really heavily. When I moved from Alabama to Iowa, I went through this huge mental shift, and I understood that I could be so much more than what society told me I had to be as a woman growing up in the Deep South. And this was never anything direct that someone was telling me. It was more of the whispers that you're hearing there and here, what people expected you to be from such a young age, how you heard people talking about other people, and all of that influenced you. When I moved to Iowa, I found that I heard a lot less of that. And so I think I'm going to stop there, since I'm keeping track of time and I don't want to go over, but feel free to put some questions in the chat.
Thanks, Allie. Now we're going to hear from Paige Mostowy. So Paige was the Stuart Artist-In-Residence in 2015, and Paige currently lives in Norwalk, Connecticut. So go ahead, Paige.
Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. I prepared something because that's what I do. So thank you all for being here. Super appreciate SDSU expanding this opportunity to all of us, and it was so amazing to be a part of the residency back in 2015, and it's been, I can't even believe it's been this long. So and feel free to cycle between these images as well. So I know that there's a couple of them. Transplanted from the north and brought up in the winding suburbs of the south, the illusions of closeness were as abundant as kudzu overtaking the woods that flanked those two-lane roads. There began what would become a sprawling cast concrete curbs that outlined asphalt paved streets with four-sided brick homes, all situated on the slopes of the former Civil War battlegrounds in beaten red clay. It undulated with weather and construction and town plans, and so too did my memory and perspective of that. And I say all this to set the scene of where this work resides, which is really left in those abandoned spaces, in between the breaks of those abandoned farmhouses along that winding riverbank. With stories which got passed down until they didn't, I found my artistic inspiration here, rooted in these histories, the objects of our lives serving as a witness to what we became. Glimpses between the glare of sunsets and dim streetlights, destined to linger, bound to a certain place or time, and what becomes a soul companion. Surrounded by the remnants of pieced together histories, which eventually became truths, the memories and the objects we carry often intertwine to shape our understanding of the world around us. So I create markers in timelines by melding my own ontology and understanding from found film footage, magazines, family photos collected across the country, and audio from different eras. I delve into the complexities of memory and nostalgia and loss, and that fine line between presence and absence, between holding on and letting go. I explore how our past experiences influence our present realities, and I seek to understand how that trauma of a broken object reshapes our identities and alters our perception of reality. Each piece a testament to the stories we choose to carry with us. And though not all my own, still familiar in their mundanity, and then broken by chance or by choice, I juxtapose traditional methods of mending, while for better or worse, rendering these objects derelict. These things no longer holding the meaning they once did because the trauma has now redefined it, simultaneously suspending the past and altering the present through perceived reparations. So feverish and unskilled in the workmanship when that temporary fix becomes good enough until it gets worse, if at all, if ever. Using what's on hand most of the time with acts that are repetitious, intrusive, forceful, and damaging. Bored, chiseled, scraped, pierced. It's too tight, it's the wrong stitch, it's too loose, it's not lined up, it's the wrong color thread, it's the wrong fabric, it's knotted, burred edges, and they are saddled next to each other, stuck. And initially, these methods might appear disparate, neurotic, haphazard, fervent, wrapping, covering, drilling, sewing, soldering, to the point where the objects in question lose their utility, rendered obsolete. The imperfections which make it uniquely itself. I question what we choose to cherish, what we leave behind, and what ends up being all we have as we navigate our lives. Exploring the parallels between phenomenological lapses in memory, of feeling, and perception, I question how an individual's history impacts their ability to partake in a consistent present without knowing the outcome and without being able to see the whole, the sum of the parts. And so you have to see it broken to understand what it went through to get here, to its present state, in which what remains is greater than what it was. Notions which provide context to the empathy of the object, it bears marks of suffering, of which we all can relate. I too have been cut open and stitched back together. I too have lost bits of myself when hurt by those closest. I too have marks that bore witness to trauma, as I'm sure most of us have. And as we grow older, we start to unravel the weight of these seemingly insignificant items. They become vessels of memories, carrying with them moments that have shaped us. Each item holds a piece of our history, connecting us to our past and grounding us in our present. Casting items aside that have outlived their usefulness of the family they were once a part of. What was left just lingered, like a friend you had to part with, an outline of who you thought you were once. And the work stands as a reflection of its own journey, of well-intentioned efforts and unintended mishaps, each imperfection telling a story, a testament to that resilience. And yet amidst the flaws and the irregularities, there lies authenticity in the imperfection, a sense of reverence, of longing towards what was, despite their altered state, for their condition is not of their making, but merely existence that is. And so that is it. So thank you. If anyone has any questions, feel free to toss them out.
Beautiful. Thank you, Paige.
Thank
So
you.
lastly, we'll have Neal Rock. So Neal lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, and was the 2018 Artist-In-Residence. And go ahead, Neal.
Thank you, everybody. And before I start, I just want to pay tribute really to, I guess, the context of the residency to Signe Stewart and Joseph Stewart. And also the sale of the Agnes Martin drawing that really kind of gave birth to this wonderful opportunity. I'm thinking about how it's always a privilege to be invited to be part of museum exhibitions and group shows. And so to be part of this exhibition with the artists here is also fantastic. I'm also thinking really about the context of the show. I mean, Signe's retrospective is in many ways for me an honor to be kind of framed within the context of that. I was recently listening to Signe's talk that she did back in October for the retrospective at the museum, and really thinking about, the grounding of her work in kind of material curiosity and time thinking, really kind of, as Signe talks really kind of elegantly across her practice about how time is really important. And there was something she said that I kind of rung true with me as well about, art is made by the artist, but completed by the viewer. And I was thinking about starting this conversation really not about grounding my practice, but actually starting with what I was doing when I was at the Stuart residency in South Dakota. And, I've been making, I consider myself a painter. I have a painting practice. I trained as a painter. But really, when I came to South Dakota, there was two strands of my practice that were kind of disparate, which is actually evident in the work that's on a show here. I have a drawing practice, which really feeds into a long-standing kind of expanding painting practice. I use silicon paint as a form of way of making work. This is something more kind of traditional in my practice. And so when I came to the residency, I was really wanting to explore drawing a lot more. It's still at that time, it was fairly new in my practice. And so I was spending time thinking about how the drawing was going to inform my practice when I was there. And so, it was I guess in many ways it was a tough time for me, because I was still trying to figure out how drawing was going to work with what I was trying to do. And then, in the subsequent years, and then the work that's on the show here now, I've had more time to really think about the role of drawing and line in my work. And of course, this is something I think Signe is kind of interested in her work as well, in terms of thinking about the importance of time, because time is also something important in this exhibition in terms of its title. And so, I was thinking about California artists like Robert Irwin that she mentioned, and grounding my practice in a kind of phenomenological existential context. So the work in the exhibition that's here, I've deliberately chosen works that are works on paper with silicon, because the silicon work has the subtle kind of evidence of line drawing embedded into the skins of the work through monotyping. And when I was at South Dakota, I actually spent, as I think some people would remember, I spent a good bit of time adjusting and manipulating the environment of the gallery. And so, that sense of environment and what is the right container for the work is something that I think is, really important. In shows that have happened after this opportunity, I've had people ask me questions. There was one question, I think, a few years later in a show where they said, what's the relationship of line to form? And it led me to think that in my work, I do see line as form, and I think more specifically a relationship of line as an emotional container, a kind of an emotional form in itself. And in recent years, I've been thinking about line in terms of its and drawing in relationship to poetry. More recent research, I've been looking at histories of the elegy and lament. And I'm thinking really about line as a way of discussing things like loss, absence, elegiac kind of histories of trauma and absence of the body. And so that's something that I think is something that is very present in my work at the moment. Moving on from that, I think that, to give a kind of contextual framing of my work, which maybe will bring it back full circle, is that, the early kind of iterations of my practice going back into the early 2000s. I was very much influenced by a generation of painters that were, I guess, kind of postmodern painters of the 90s, where painting was being really questioned as a kind of discipline and a kind of way of making art. I'm thinking about people like Shirley Caneda, Fabian Maccaccio, Jonathan Lasker, artists that were really trying to dismantle painting in many ways, thinking about different kinds of materials, different kinds of paint, juxtaposing different kinds of histories together. And so I came out of that context of really questioning the kind of the foundation of the practice itself. And in, I think where I'm at right now in my work, which brings it actually, interestingly, more to a conversation with grounded phenomenological existential conditions of abstraction from the 60s, which I think ties it with Signy's work, and an artist like Robert Irwin is thinking about my work, grounding it in kind of issues or kind of ideas around spirituality and the body. And that's the work that I think that's in the show today. And I think I'm having, these questions around the relationship of line to poetry, to histories of the elegy and lament. And I think there's been also an emotional, there's been very much an emotional shift, I think, in the work as well from work of the previous decades. I think I'm going to leave it there, and I'm sure we're going to have questions at the end as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Neal, and everyone for sharing. So now we will move to the Q&A portion of the talk. So please continue to write into the chat if you have questions. To begin, we have a question for all of the artists. So I'm asking you to consider the exhibition title, Moments of Is, which places us in past, present, and future. So thinking about this, how did the Stuart Artist-In-Residence program impact your artistic practice before, during, and/or after your residency?
So I'll start with like the during the residency. So this was my first time since grad school that I had the time to really focus on multiple pieces at once. Usually I'm just focusing on one piece and I feel like I really need to get it done, and then I can like nicely move to the next one. But this was such a different experience for me in that I had this huge space to be working with. So I was working in the context of this big wide gallery and thinking about how I could be filling it in the 30 days that I was there. And I was thinking about it the same way that I'm building up like my sculptures in these layers. Like, how can I build up the layers of this gallery, and how can I be working on all these different parts, and how can I really create a relationship between the work and the environment it's in? And I found that, working directly in that environment was really productive for me, because I could think about my work actually going on these murals that I was creating, whereas normally I'm having to make these tiny little mock-ups in my studio. Or make these drawings that are digital on my computer and imagine what that's going to look like. So the physicality of being in the space was really important for me. And I think during this period too, I became a lot less shy with color. This pink in my studio is a very new move for me. Like, this is in the last 2 or 3 years. The work that I'm making has just become so much more saturated. And before the residency, I think I was really shy and bashful in some ways about using these really saturated colors. And I think that spoke to like where I was as an artist as well. I was dabbling in a lot of different things. I was hustling, I was adjuncting and doing small jobs, and maybe the work wasn't feeling as confident. And then during the residency, I was feeling more confident about the work and the direction it was going. And after the residency concluded, I felt like I was in a much stronger place for the work. And I was able to like take what I learned from there and really continue working it into my practice.
Okay, well, I can sense an awkward silence, so I'm gonna fill that space. Yeah, it was difficult to take on that space at the university. Like Ali was talking about, and actually, it was the first time that the university and the department and Diana Beale in particular gave me the freedom to really manipulate and change that space. I actually spent half the residency building walls, changing the lights, creating an environment. I realized pretty quickly that I needed to create the right container for the work, for the drawings. And that had a really big impact on the subsequent shows. A solo show I did at the University of Virginia, where I now teach, was modeled on that show at South Dakota State University. And I really became, it really allowed me to have the confidence to spend time manipulating an environment in exactly the way that I needed it to be for the work to do what it eventually did, hopefully. So I think for me, it was a very important time. And I think that the repercussions are still, still present. I actually have a show opening in London next Saturday, and I'm using some of the same, I guess, epiphanies, you could say, in the show in London that I discovered when I was on the residency. So yeah.
Yeah, similarly, my work, aside from the projects that are shown here, usually form as a body of an installations, and these installations becomes, like I said, like I mentioned earlier, a collection of sort, an accumulation of materials that are site specific and become site responsive. So the gallery space was an incredible space. It becomes a container. My practice takes me outside the studio for the most part, take me outside the galleries, and so I spend most of my time outdoors and collecting materials, and the gallery becomes a container for all of that materials to come back to and exist together and questions together, and not so much to generate answer, but to generate more questions for myself, as well as the people that are coming in and see the work and make the connections that I didn't make. And and so in a way, to kind of go back to the idea of moments of is, and the philosophy of the exhibitions, that's where I kind of exist as well for the larger installation work of how putting it's not only the practice of bringing materials together, but the practice of being in a mental state of understanding that I myself, as well as the materials that I'm sort of gathering, all have their own past, present, and future. But myself putting myself in that moment, kind of sort of ground myself to be in that very moment, being in the moment with everything, and trying to understand everything at that very particular time, and kind of trust that everything has their own past and futures that we can connect as well. And also, like the work of the contrails, where everything is circling each other. I truly believe that everything is cyclical, and past, present, and future. The idea of that is just one for me. It's not three different stages. It's all one. And so the exhibitions, this exhibition is very much the same body of work as the installation I did at the Ritz Gallery, as well as the next thing that I'm going to do, as well as the previous thing that I did somewhere else. So to me, it's all one, and it's just markers of time and markers of space to sort of allow myself to navigate through time as one.
That definitely resonates with me as well, and I will try to explain it in my own way, but you did such an eloquent job. I mean, and I think that is what is really unique about all of us within this particular space, is the fact that all of our work is embodying this particular moment that is wrapping in and around space and time, and thoughts and feelings, and how we take that apart and put it back together, or not. But yeah, I would say creating in the gallery, I mean, it's definitely a strange container, because it's your studio space and then it ends up becoming an exhibition space. And it's such a beautiful room to be in. Like, I don't think I loved it. And especially with the juxtaposition of the gallery and then the landscape outside, and what for me, it was very unfamiliar. And really soaking in that moment of where you are in a particular place really resonated with me, and the work that I've continued to create, because I constantly feel very cyclical within my work. Ali, you mentioned individual glue dots, and putting those, like I recognize that. I do something similar. So it's very, you think, oh, it's a moment, but it's not a moment. It's it's hours and hours and hours, and you never stop. And I don't know if I answered the question or not, but that's where I'm at.
Donna put a message in the chat wondering if you can share about any moments where you witnessed your residency and your work have an impact on SDSU students and faculties. What do you perceive as the value to students / faculty having the opportunity to connect with practicing artists through this residency?
I mean, one thing I'll say is I really appreciated it was almost a rule that my door had to be open for the whole of the residency. And so students would come in and really just be curious about what I was doing, you know, and I love that. I mean, it's, you know, doors are meant to be open, not closed, I think. And so during the residency, there was that. I was also invited to be part of classes and give talks, and in the broader kind of sense of the importance of that, I think it's really important because I run a residency program myself here at the University of Virginia, the Freeman residency, and I really value the diversity of research interests and creative interests, intellectual interests that an artist might bring to a department, because I know, you know, teaching myself, that students can sometimes, they get to know your jam, right? They get to know what you're about. And, you know, the artists that come in can bring these fresh perspectives. And I think it's great for students to have that, because the more they get exposed to different ways of making, thinking, approaching visual art, it's just all the better for them in terms of their development as artists and their curiosity as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking something similar to that too, and just that it's really important for students to see the process of something. I think sometimes they see these big, elaborate pieces of work, and you know, they don't know like where exactly it started. So having the ability to talk to students about like, well, this is where my work was when I was, you know, your age. When I started, I was a painter, and now I'm working in ceramics, and I'm making these like sculptures that are placed in environments, and they're just like using all these eclectic materials. And talking about how I got to that point, I think is something that's really comforting to students, and also makes them feel like they have options to do things outside of like the traditional modes of making work. And also just like seeing, like Neal said, other ways of making work. Like it doesn't always just have to be a painting, or maybe it does be a painting, maybe it is a painting, maybe it's how they're thinking about making that painting. And I was going to say something else and it totally just flipped out over my head, but I've also sustained a lot of relationships with faculty. Like I frequently talk to Diana, and I'm frequently talking with Molly Wicks, who was formal faculty there. And I think it's really important for artists to continuously expand their artistic circles. And that's something that I find really difficult living in the Midwest. Like we don't have a lot of, we've got like a museum and we have like faculty in our university, but it's hard to like find artists outside of that. And so when I can find these relationships in other places, those are things that I want to continue to sustain and kind of pull from for my own practice.
Definitely. I think, I don't know if you all had a different experience than I did, but I felt, even though I kept my door open all the time, I don't think I got a lot of visitors. You know, it seemed like they were, and I was the first one, so it was still new. I don't know. But I had this amazing opportunity because I was able to connect with some of the students, but I was able to connect with some of the faculty. And there was one faculty member who was a math instructor, and they took me under their wing, and we ended up going out hunting in the middle of the prairie, where like I never would have had that experience. And it was something where like I learned how to gut birds and how to shoot a shotgun and things that I never would have known how to do. And then I took the materials with me and I've used them in my work since. So I mean, I don't know why I just have all these bags of feathers, but you know, they're gonna make an appearance. And it's one of those things where, you know, you carry these moments with you. You also carry the objects with you as well throughout with this time that we had. So
yeah. Along the line of my work and my practice as to me, the philosophy of the work becomes like a laboratory, and in that sense, it becomes an open door and an open environment for conversations. And I know I had a lot of those moments when I was there with the students, and those are the most valuable, moments of the residency for me, and that's why I seek these opportunities to be with others, and more specifically students, because that's they're in the moment of questions, and the questions need to be valued, and the every question's as nuanced, as simple, as minute, should be valued as something very significant. And I hope my questions were also mundane and also minute and also quote unquote insignificance. But I hope I could be I hope I was a colleague to everyone, and I felt that way when I was there. Putting myself as an equal to everyone there, and doesn't matter the level of art educations or whatnot. Everyone comes in with their sets of eyes and their sets of influences, and I think that's the most valuable experience that I had when I was there, is to see people coming in, connecting the dots, drawing different lines, seeing different relationship between materials that I brought back that I was questioning, and raising more questions. And so I had a lot of those moments, and I truly appreciative of those moments, and for them to allow themselves to be vulnerable with those questions as well, and to share. It's a sharing space, and that's what I love about that environment. Yeah.
Thank you. I see we have a question from Peter Reichert. Does working in the studio during a residency feel different than working in your own studio at any other time?
I will say hard yes. Yeah, hard yes. I am now a parent of a toddler, and 100%. I think to have residency time where that is what you are doing, that is your sole focus in your life. I think that it provides an amazing opportunity for artists like us to be able to create the work that we do. And I think without programs like this, it's not as sustainable. As a working artist, I'm not, I have a little bit of a different career path. So I'm a working artist as well as a parent, and I work a 40-hour-a-week, like, full-time office job instead of teaching in the arts. So it's definitely something where, these residencies really give people the opportunity to focus on what they're doing, and get that work out of ourselves and into a public space.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, like, working in your studio, like, sometimes that becomes the last thing you do because you're worried about all these other things that you have to do. Like, I have to do the job to make the money. I'm also a muralist, so that's where most of my income comes from. Not teaching. You think it would be teaching, but it's not teaching. That's actually the second one. But like teaching and painting murals and doing all the commission work. And then, like, at the end of the day, once that's done, then I can finally get into my studio. Whereas when you're at a residency, like, the thing that you prioritize is that studio work. And so that is something that is so valuable, because you can say, sorry, I'm at a residency right now, I'm in another state, like, we can chat later about this other work related thing. It's nice to be able to come to a space like that, and it feels like this protective bubble from the rest of the world, so that you really can focus on your work and keep thinking about it, and the only conversations you're having are about the work and not about all the other stuff in your life, which is still important, but it's nice to have that time when you're just focusing on the work.
Yeah, I think also the other thing was, there is that focus, Sally, of course, And that's an important time. I mean, you know, you think about time and space, right? It's a different time and space to kind of work in. But I also really value when you're on not most residencies, you're with other people. Sometimes you're with a bunch of other artists. But you know, I remember talking. It's funny Peter asked that question. I remember conversations with Peter and Peter's work and Diana showing me, you know, because Diana obviously is a preeminent printmaker and knows a lot more about line than I do. So I was actually learning from other artists while I was there, and to, you know, to be in conversation with not just students, but to be in conversation with artists that are working at the university. And I don't know, I really value those things, you know. So I think that sense of time and space, and again, it's so different from your daily life, right? You go into a new place, a new social context. I actually remember one conversation. I think it might have been Diana's class. There was a student. They were doing critiques, and it was a drawing of somebody on a horseback, and I just assumed that they were drawing from a film, right? I'd never experienced that in my life. I thought, well, why are you using film imagery? And actually, that was their day. That was their reality. They were on a ranch most days, and so getting a sense of a different, you know, a different social fabric and what people's day to day is that's different to yours is really can be pretty amazing.
Yeah, and for me, as I mentioned earlier, the gallery space becomes the container of that world that I was in, that I was fortunate to be in for a month, and I treat that with the studio, my own studio as well, and so it becomes, you know, different containers, but it's more importantly, what does it contain is it becomes a model universe for everything that is surrounding it. And like I mentioned, I spend most of the time just kind of wandering around in the woods and whatnot, collecting material. So the thing that strikes me, or the things that I force myself to be in, is kind of surround myself with that environment. And so a lot of time for these residency that I go to the shift in environments and practicing practicing to notice the shifts in the environments, the changes in the fauna and flora. That was the most striking part for me, and then kind of bring that back into the studio. And I mean, I kind of say this a lot of time, and I believe it as well, that my hand as an artist is just a gathering hand rather than a making hand, and whatever is gathered becomes the life of its own, and hopefully the lives kind of continue by other people sort of contribute to that conversation and questions and thinking about it. And so that exploration of South Dakota as a landscape, and the conversation with the people that do live there is what made that container very significant and beautiful. And yeah, and to have the time is great. Of course.
Thank you. I see Diana has a question for another audience member. Signe Stewart's with us today, and Diana's asked, Signe, what have you learned and observed over the years from the Stuart Air program?
Well, I don't know, it's been an interesting experience for me because I wanted it to be hands-off. From my point of view, I wanted the residencies to be faculty and student driven, so that they would choose people that they felt could be the most beneficial for themselves and the students. So what's been really great is that every artist, every resident artist has been so different. And I think that brings so much experience to students that they would never have had otherwise. So I really appreciate how choices have been made. And I feel like all of you who are here today, and everybody, you're very successful. From my standpoint, the word success means that you're still doing what you did last year and the year before, and you'll keep on going. And to me, that's success. Whether or not you sell a million things or you just keep working is the biggest success, is just working. So keep it up. It's great to see all of you.
Thank you, Signe. She always says it best. Well, thank you. Are there any other questions as we wrap up? I don't think I see any in the chat. We just want to thank you all again for joining us today. It's been fun to connect this way, and the show is open through May 12th. So we hope people get out to see it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. This was a great privilege.
Thank
Nice
you,
to be able to
everybody.
see Neal again too. Neal was the Grant Wood Fellow when I was a graduate student here at the University of Iowa. So
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you, Holly.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
thank
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 you.
you, everyone.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.